So today we're going to keep working with our little parabolas and figuring out how to graph our equations quickly and effectively without the use of a graphing calculator. Well, but we might not have a calculator. Like the next quiz, maybe, just possibly, most likely would be a calculator-free quiz. Not always. Not always there, right? Yeah. All right. So, problem 42 in this section has to do with looking at a quadratic that's written in the standard form. So here's that example of that standard form, that ax squared plus bx plus c form. And then they want us to be able to graph it without using a graphing calculator. So when it's in the standard form, we can't just like really look at it very easily to be able to determine how to graph it. But there are two methods that we can use, and we'll go through both of those methods, and then you can make a personal choice on which one you like the best. The first one we're going to talk about is averaging the intercepts, and we actually talked about that on Tuesday, 2 days ago, right before the quiz, where we found the two spots where it crosses the x-intercept, or the x-axis, right, the x-intercept, and we knew that our vertex has to be right dead in the middle of those two intercepts, right, because our parabolas are symmetric. So when we find out those two intercepts, we just got to figure out the middle, plug it in, and it'll give us what our vertex is. So we've kind of started some of the talk with that one. And then the other one is called completing the square. And we can use completing the square to factor quadratics as well. But I don't think we've really been exposed too much of it. So we're going to talk a little bit about completing the square. And when we complete the square, it'll automatically get us into that vertex form or that graphing form. Remember where that was, that y equals ax minus h squared plus k, right? And that told us what the vertex was. All right. So let's start off by running through how to find the average, what we talked about just the other day. So we have y equals x squared minus 2x minus 15, right, as our quadratic. We know that our a is the number in front of the x squared, and that's technically a 1, so a positive 1. So we know that our quadratic is going to open upward, right? And then even when it comes to that stretch or compress, it's really not going to be stretched or compressed, right? It's going to be that nice kind of quote-unquote parent kind of graph look to it. So we just need to figure out where it crosses the x-axis. And we know when we cross the x-axis, our y value is always 0. So we need to find 0 equals x squared minus 2x minus 15. So we got a quadratic. So granted, we could use the quadratic formula to solve this for x, but I'm just going to go ahead and factor this one. So I think we like to factor using the x. So on the top, it's all woo, 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 woo. A times c, oops. So a times c is going to give me negative 15. B for the bottom, and the bottom is negative 2. So I know that when I that when I multiply, I have to get a negative 15. And the only way I can get a negative number is if one is positive and one is negative, right? So I got to multiply to get 15, difference of 2. So it's either 1 and 15, 3 and 5. I know it's going to be 3 and 5. And in order to get a negative 2, I got to have a positive 3 and a negative 5, right? So now I have what? 0 equals x plus 3 and x minus 5. So now I just need to figure out what values of x that works for, right? By that 0 product property, one of these two have to equal 0. So either x plus 3 has to equal 0, or x minus 5 has got to equal 0. Right? X equals negative 3 and x equals 5. So to start with my whole graphing, I know that I'm going to cross the x-axis at -3, right? And then I know the other one I'm going to cross at is 5. And I know that because I'm crossing the x-axis at those 2 points, and I know that my parabolas are symmetric, my vertex has to be right in the middle of those 2 numbers, right? So I got to figure out the average of the 2. So to figure out the average, we're going to do -3 plus 5. I added 2 numbers together, so I'm going to divide by 2. So that's going to give me 2 over 2, which is 1. So then I know somewhere along my x, where x is 1, somewhere along here is the vertex. So I just have to figure out how high or how low I got to go with my x equal 1 to figure out where that vertex is. So if I know that my x equals 1, bless you, I'm going to put 1 back in for x, and then it's going to tell me what my y value is. Okay? So y equals 1 squared minus 2 times 1 minus 15. So 1 minus 2 minus 15. Ooh, running out of room. Y is going to equal -16. So then I now know that my vertex is at, when x was 1, my y is -16. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So I was at 1, 16. So that's my vertex right in the middle. And I know I got a continuous function. Whoops. Perfectly drawn parabola in somebody's world. Fill it in fiat a little bit. Okay. So this is when we use averages to figure out how to draw our parabola without using a graphing calculator, right? So we're just going to take our quadratic, we're going to factor it or solve it, and then that's going to give us our 2 x-intercepts. And then to figure out the vertex, we know it's got to be in the middle, or the average of those 2. So you add them, divide by 2, that gives you your x value, plug it back in, and that'll give you your y. So that's method number 1. You ready for method number 2? I know you're excited. All right. So for number 2, we're going to use this method called completing the square. So our graphing form, or that vertex form, is y equals a x minus h squared plus k. So when they talk about completing the square, this is that piece that's being squared, right? So ultimately you're completing this little piece. You're figuring out that little part that's being squared. And once we figure out that little part that's being squared, we've officially completed the square. And then we're in this little form. It tells us our h and our k, which tells us what our vertex is, right? So our problem was, what was it? Y equals x squared minus 2x minus 15. So that completing the square, that square part is still like a little quadratic, but it's got to be a perfect little square. And this x squared minus 2x minus 15, it's not a perfect square because we just factored it a minute ago and we found out that it wasn't a perfect square. So I want to create this little gap. I'm going to go with some parentheses. I'm going to go x squared minus 2x, and I'm going to go plus, and I'm going to leave myself a little spot because I need to figure out what that number is. Okay, and then minus 15, because that's the rest of my little problem. And another little line. So we know in mathematics, equations are balanced, right? And we can do whatever we want to one side of the equation as long as we do it to the other side of the equation, right? Remember all that good stuff? So when it comes to completing the square, we don't want to do anything with this side of the equation, right? We want it to stay y equals. So if I don't know, say I added 10 here on that same side of the equation, but over here I'm going to subtract the 10, right? Because if I add 10, if I subtract 10, I didn't change the problem any. Does that make sense? So I can put in whatever number, I just gotta, if I put it in, I gotta take it out at the same time. So we just need to figure out what number we're gonna put in there. And it's really a cute little formula. Oops. So many colors to choose from. That little guy is like our b value, right? And that a squared plus b squared plus c. So to figure out this value, we just do b divided by 2, and then we square it. So for us, our b is negative 2 over 2, and we just got to square that. So negative 2 over 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. So in my parentheses, I added 1. So what do I have to do to my negative 15? Subtract 1, right? And then I haven't changed the problem at all, because what I added, I then subtracted, right? Oops, I forgot my square. Go back and add, oop, 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 wrong color, wrong color. Right. I forgot our little square on there, right? Because we're completing the square. So now we just got to factor, oh, no I don't. Mama's having a moment. There we go. All right. So now, when I look at this quadratic, I can now factor that quadratic. That quadratic right there is now a perfect square. Okay. So if I were to do the little X box, a times c, a times c is 1, b for my bottom, b is negative 2. So I got to multiply to get a positive. So it's either got to be positive, positive, or negative, negative. This guy down here is telling me it's going to be a negative, negative. So multiply to get to 1, and when I add them, I get negative 2. So negative 1 and negative 1. Okay. So now I have y equals. I can rewrite this quadratic as x minus 1, x minus 1. And what's negative 15 minus 1? Negative 16. So y equals x minus 1 squared minus 16. Did I get it into that graphing form? Yeah. And now I can see what my vertex is. What's my vertex going to be? X is going to be 1, and y is going to be negative 16. Not too bad. All right, let's do one more of like completing the square, just to give us some practice on it. Sound good? So let's say we had, let's go with y equals, let's go with x squared plus 8x plus 10. So a lot of times when I do these problems, like I'll ask myself, well, can I factor this really easy? How bad is it? Well, can I factor this one? A times c is 10, and I got to get a difference of 8. So the only way I know how to get 10 is 1 times 10 and 2 times 5. And is that going to get me to 8? Nope. So I can't even factor this one the way that it is. So if I can't factor it, then I'm going to think about completing that square. So if I want to complete the square, I got to add me a little gap in there, don't I? So y equals x squared plus 8x plus something, right? Then I can't lose my plus 10, and I'm going to have to subtract something off of that. So to figure out this value, that was that b divided by 2 squared, right? My b is 8. So 8 over 2 squared. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So if I add 16 here, what do I got to do over here? Subtract 16. Yep. So now I'm going to try and factor this little guy. Right? And if I need to, I can make my little x. Right? A times c and b. A times c is 16. B is 8. So I got to multiply to get 16. When I add it, it's got to be 8. And we can also sit there and go, wow, I know that I'm completing the square, so I know it's got to be a perfect square. So I don't even have to think about 8 and 2. I know it's automatically got to be the same number. So I'm going to go with a 4 and a 4, right? So my quadratic is going to give me x plus 4 times x plus 4. 10 minus 6 is, or 10 minus 16 is 6, negative 6. Get this into our cute little form. Okay. And now we're into our graphing form. And now I can find my vertex. So my vertex is going to be negative 4, negative 6.